You can't build something like this nowadays with modern materials and make it cost effective. The fact that the buildings are still standing after, over 100 years speaks a lot for how they basically over-engineered everything back in the day.
That was Rob Wilhelmi, who is Rockford's brownfield redevelopment specialist. He's talking about the massive 17-acre former Barber-Colman industrial complex. The site in southwest Rockford once employed thousands of workers, but it's sat vacant since 2002, and it's deteriorated to a shell of its former self over the past 2 decades. Now, the city is on the cusp of bringing it back to life. Milwaukee-based J. Jefferson Company plans to turn it into nearly 1,000 living units and roughly 130,000 square feet of commercial space.
One of the biggest tools that Jeffers Group is using is historical tax credits, and the fact that they can adaptively reuse these buildings and keep the historic nature of them makes them eligible for that program. And between the state and federal tax credits, they're looking at 45 cents on the dollar for eligible redevelopment costs, which is huge.
Rob took us on a tour through the vacant site before developers take over the space and begin their work.
It's crazy to think, you look at like the wood beams that they put in here, and back in the day, not having any heavy equipment like we have today, how they basically got these in place using manpower and horsepower. The picture from 1902 is the coolest. Like I said, it shows them using horses to move the earth.
Inside the buildings are old artifacts and machinery that were left behind as relics of history.
There's some crazy stuff that's still left here. In this site, between buildings 4 and 5, there's 3 of these safes that we have no clue what's in them. They've never been opened by the city, so that's kind of one of the questions we're going to want to know when Jeffers redevelops it. You see somebody try taking a cutting torch to it and just laughed at it.
So how did J. Jeffers, a company from Milwaukee, discover this property?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. We had an asbestos abatement contractor that has done work for the city before, and he had mentioned to me that he's doing some work up in Milwaukee with a company that specializes in these adaptive reuse projects of historical structures, and actually said, they might be interested in the watch factory building. So I reached out to J. Jeffers, and they came down and visited. I believe it was January of 2021. And we took a look at the watch factory, and we walked through the watch factory and got up to the 3rd floor with a great view from the top. And I was talking with Brian Laughlin with Jeffers and mentioned to him, how's it look? What do you think? And he was honest with me. He's like, I love the building, but it's a little too small for what we typically do for projects. And he asked me if they have anything bigger, and happened to be next to a window looking south, and I said, well, see those 2 big smokestacks down there? I said, is that big enough for you? And his eyes lit up. Told him a little bit about the property. He said, can we go see it now? I said, yeah. So we took a quick drive down South Main, walked the property, and he basically said, we're going to do this project right away. And moving forward, working with them has been great as we get this project to the finish line.
The site has a deep history dating back to the early 1900s. The city of Rockford acquired it after a business that succeeded Barber-Colman shut down in 2002. And Rockford has been doing environmental remediation with the help of federal grants so it could prepare the site for a developer.
Barber-Colman Company, founded by Howard Coleman. He was basically the Thomas Edison of Rockford. He had, I believe 130-something patents on inventions that he basically brought to the public in industrial use. They moved the company here originally in 1902. That's when they broke ground on buildings 1 and 2. Those buildings are no longer here, but between 1902 and 1910, they put up several additional structures that are still here as the company continued to grow and expand. Well, back in 2002, when we acquired this property, we immediately began working with Hendricks Group, and they were actually the first developer that we had an agreement with on the property. Unfortunately, Ken had his accident, and that development agreement went away. So biggest thing with these old industrial sites is basically try to make them as marketable as possible, and that includes removing a lot of the environmental hazards. Obviously, industrial site that dates back 100 years is going to have them. So over the last 20 years, we've been using primarily EPA grants, assessment grants, cleanup grants, revolving loan fund monies to basically take away those environmental hazards to make the properties more marketable. That was one of the most attractive features for J. Jeffers, that and the fact that we had already assembled the land parcels to create the critical mass for their project.
Mayor Tom McNamara said the city is a little more than a month away from bringing a redevelopment deal to the City Council for consideration. That deal would lay out the city's commitments to help spur the more than $400 million project.
This is a huge win for the city. I mean, you look at the Embassy Suites project and what that has done for downtown and just the positive impact that it's brought. This is going to be a huge win for us. I mean, you're talking a multi-use project that there's public engagement. They want to bring the public down to the site. They want the public to share this site, and they want to make it multicultural so everybody can enjoy it. So it's going to be huge.